Hi everybody. Well, I wanted to give you a feedback on your first negotiation exercise, the one between Pendant and Arglu, those two make-believe countries or entities that had a border dispute between them. And so I know I kind of tossed you into this scenario, but that was exactly what I wanted to do. So you all worked with the same scenario, and you can go back and reread it in case you forget about it. But we had 12 groups, and most of those groups had 2 members, so you worked in pairs. And a couple of the groups had 3 members in them, which added a different dynamic or a different layer to the negotiations. So generally speaking, this was an exercise in bilateral negotiations. So it's between 2 sides. Sometimes we talk about multilateral negotiations where there are more than 2 parties involved, and sometimes it is bilateral negotiation with a third party intervention. In this case, it was more or less direct bilateral negotiations. Let me start with some of the challenges that you guys pointed to. And I'm basing all of this feedback on your work in the exercise, but also on the post-exercise surveys that you filled, and some other feedback and communications that I heard from students. So one of the first things that some of you or many of you questioned was the lack of information, right? The scenario was very basic. And since those are make-believe places, you didn't know a lot about anything pretty much, right? You didn't know about anything about the location, the geography, the topography, and those are important things. Are we talking about landlocked countries? Do they have warm ports? Are they connected to the rest of the world? What does the rest of the world look like, right? Are those mountainous countries with rugged terrain, or this is all kind of low-lying plateaus, etc. So those are all important information when we are negotiating a border dispute or any dispute between 2 countries. You didn't have any information about the wealth of those countries, which one of them was wealthier, which one had a better economy or a better financial base to support whatever it is that they want to do. You didn't have any information about the population and the demographics. Who has a larger population? What are the ages? Is that a healthy population? Are there cultural differences? Etc., etc. All of those things that many times we kind of know or we can research and know. I didn't give you all that information. And of course, you didn't know anything about their military force, how strong the military force was. Do they have any alliances, any agreements? Are they engaged in other conflicts? Because even if you have a really strong military, if they are engaged in 5 other open conflicts, how thin can they stretch themselves, right? So you didn't have all that information, and that is kind of crippling or more challenging when it comes to negotiations, but still you did a good job with that. The other kind of number 2 point that was brought up by people was the lack of responsiveness from the other side. So in a couple of the groups, there was one member who did all the negotiations, right? At that point, is there really negotiations or just monologue and calling on the other side to get engaged? Those of you who had to deal with that did a really good job by trying to find ways to attract the other side to the conversations, in different ways. Some of you by threats, some of you by just trying to lure them in, or not exactly begging, but pleading with the other side to step in. But of course, if the other side doesn't talk to you at all or talks very little, that impacts the negotiation. Some of you just felt kind of that they had no experience and they felt inadequate and uncomfortable. That's fine. I knew exactly where you were when I was assigning this exercise, and that was part of it. Part of it, I think that in anything, but especially when it comes to negotiations, the best way to learn is by doing and by hands-on and experiencing things. And so just trying is great. And then there were some of you who seemed to be focused more and ask a lot of questions about the rules, which were directly related to your grade. And because of that, kind of stopped themselves from fully embracing the game. Kind of being afraid of making the wrong move because of the possible impact on the grade. I want to say that despite those challenges that are all there and were all very, very real, all of you who participated did a really good job. And we'll talk about all the things that we can take out of it in a minute or two. But I was impressed and happy, and you were creative. You tried to do things. You tried to make up information or rely on whatever information was there to extrapolate it in order to have talks and some kind of negotiations. Just to be very clear about the grading, as I said, this is a participation exercise. So if you posted at least three messages and you completed the post survey, you got full credit for this exercise. So some general insights that we can take out of this one is many of you talked about this idea that they were how do we balance the different interests? And for those of you who reflected on that, they said things like, I wasn't sure, do I need to focus only on my interest or try to advance mutual interest or think about the other side? And we go into that more in depth later on in the class, exactly how do we balance interests in any negotiations. There was a lot of that short-term versus long-term solutions here. Sometimes you can win a battle but lose the war, right? So if you are able to be strong enough and the other side capitulates to whatever you want at the time, you could say, I was victorious in this round. However, if you're more interested in long-term relations with that other party, then you might have actually lost by winning this specific dispute. The other thing that came a lot, and many of you have moved almost naturally into doing it, and it's very interesting, is trying to connect this immediate conflict over the border to things like long-term economic relations. So changing the game, changing the dispute from we are arguing over a piece of land to using what we call issue linkage and using a more holistic approach to try and see, can we create mutual gains here? Is there a situation where we are both actually going to be victorious at the end of the day? And that's great and excellent, and we will talk about all of those methods and possibilities. Some of you decided consciously to use sneaky tactics, to be a bully, and that was great because those are always there, and we need to A, know when to apply such methods, and B, know what to do if the other side is using such methods. So I thought that that was really great to see too. And then something that was very, very clear is that came up was this idea of reciprocity in the pairs or in the groups that somebody started by being a bully. Very quickly you saw from the other side a strong response as well, whereas in other groups where the first teammate came up with a more conciliatory message, the other side seemed to have responded in kind. This is related to theories of reciprocity, which are developed very well, and we will talk about them as well. So things that you valued from yourself. This is where I ask you to grade yourself and your counterpart. And the thing that you valued, the things that made you give yourself or the other side a higher grade, included creativity, articulation, the clarity and the quality of the explanations of each positions, how responsive and communicative the other side was, and did you feel that you were exchanging ideas, that you were in a dialogue, or that you were just talking at each other? You seem to have valued this exchange of ideas more. Being kind and nice was also something that many of you highlighted. It was easier to work with those who were kind. You valued a lot that you yourself put an effort and showed dedication, but also that it came from the other side as well. Nobody was willing to give up, but just moving on. You talked about fairness and about using data and information. And for the few groups that were able to arrive at an agreement, you saw that as a real strength of the process. Also, this idea of being able to stay in character and divorce yourself from I'm feeling inadequate or I'm worried about a grade, but really focusing on the negotiation. And then finally, another point that you seem to value a lot is protecting the interests, protecting your interests in the exchange. So this was just, a very quick and basic attempt to negotiate and to try and see how does it feel, and how does it feel in the realm of international relations. And from now on, we will use theories, some readings, but we will continue and look at both real-world cases and do these simulations and exercises. So thank you for listening, and we'll move on.